All right, ready to dive deep into some seriously heady medieval philosophy.
Always up for a good philosophical workout.
Today we're tackling something called the Binarium Famosissimum.
Sounds a bit like a spell from Harry Potter, doesn't it?
Right, but it's actually a pair of ideas, these doctrines that pop up together a lot in 13th century writings.
And get this, the name Binarium Famosissimum, meaning the most famous pair, wasn't even used by medieval thinkers.
Really?
It's a 20th century label.
Oh, that's interesting. So, like, we're looking back and trying to figure out why these two ideas were so connected for them.
Exactly. Like, we're kind of playing philosophical detective here.
I like it.
So the first of these famous pair, and get ready for a mouthful, is universal hylomorphism.
Universal what now?
Hylomorphism.
Okay, break that down for us. What exactly are we talking about here?
Well, think back to Aristotle. You know, he had this idea of hylomorphism.
Right. Everything's made of matter and form, the stuff and the shape.
Yeah, so hylomorphism basically says everything we can touch, you know, physical things, are made of matter and form.
Okay, so far so good. But universal hylomorphism, that sounds like they're taking this idea to a whole new level.
They did, actually. Universal hylomorphism says everything, even souls and angels, has matter.
Wait, even souls and angels, how can something like a soul, which is supposed to be immaterial, have matter? Did they think angels were, like, made of some kind of, I don't know, ghost ectoplasm?
Not exactly. They weren't talking about physical matter, of course. They called it spiritual matter. It's not physical stuff, but it's kind of like this fundamental thatness that allows a soul or an angel to exist.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around that. So it's like even a soul needs some kind of foundation to be built upon, even if it's not physical stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And that foundation, that's their spiritual matter.
Right. And then their form, you know, the specific form of a particular soul, shapes that spiritual matter into a unique being.
Okay, I can see how this would fit with the medieval mindset. They were big on hierarchy.
Right. Absolutely.
So this idea that everything comes from God, he's the first cause, the only truly simple being.
Yeah.
Everything else, even angels, is like a recipe. You need the ingredients, the matter, and then you need someone to put it all together to shape it.
Right.
And that's God.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Finding medieval texts that directly explain why God's simplicity was so crucial, it's surprisingly difficult.
Really. It seems like that would be a pretty key point to make explicit.
You would think so, right? It's like they thought it was so obvious it didn't need stating.
Or maybe there were deeper theological reasons why they were hesitant to, like, spell it all out.
Could be. It's one of those mysteries we're still trying to unpack.
That's fascinating. Okay, so we've got this universal hylomorphism trying to explain what everything is made of, even the stuff we can't see or touch.
Right.
But then there's this second idea that often gets paired with it, plurality of forms.
And that one is a real head-scratcher.
Yeah, I can imagine. So we're not just talking about an apple being red. That's an accidental form.
Right.
It can change color without the apple ceasing to be an apple.
Exactly.
Plurality of forms is asking how many substantial forms, the ones that actually define what something isha, can exist in one thing.
Precisely. It's a question about the very essence of being.
So, like, is a human just one soul?
Hmm.
Or is there a separate form for our body,
Okay.
a form for our mind, and so on, all layered like a metaphysical onion?
Yeah, you've got it. That's exactly what they were grappling with. Thinkers like William of Ockham were big proponents of this layering idea.
Ockham, the guy with the razor.
The very same. And one of his most fascinating arguments for the plurality of forms was about the veneration of saints' bodies.
How so?
Well, he said if there wasn't a separate form of corporeity, a form that makes a body, then after death, how could that body still be considered truly theirs?
I see. So if the body is just matter shaped by the soul and the soul departs after death, what's left to make that body specifically the saint's body?
Exactly. Occam thought you needed a separate form of corporeity to ensure that connection, even after death.
Okay, that's a really interesting example of how these seemingly abstract ideas had very real implications for how they understood things like sainthood and relics.
Yeah, these weren't just philosophical games. They were trying to understand the nature of reality itself.
But I imagine not everyone was on board with this stack of forms idea. It seems like it could get pretty messy pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Thomas Aquinas, for example, he was vehemently opposed to it.
So Aquinas was in the one substance, one form camp.
Exactly. He argued that only the first form to shape a substance could be substantial.
Yeah.
Any others were just accidental. So for Aquinas, humans are a deeper unity of body and soul, not a collection of separate forms.
So we've got these two camps, one saying everything's got matter, even angels, and the other debating how many fundamental forms can exist in one thing.
It's like they were trying to create the ultimate cosmic blueprint, but using very different tools to do it.
Right. And the thing is, they kept bringing these two ideas together. It makes you wonder why. Why did universal hylomorphism and the plurality of forms end up as this philosophical power couple, this most famous pair?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think to answer it, we need to dig a little deeper into the philosophical landscape of the 13th century.
Agreed.
There's a lot more to unpack here, but
Definitely.
we'll have to save that for another time. For now, let's leave our listeners with this little philosophical puzzle to ponder.
A good cliffhanger. I like it.
Oh, I just got to keep them coming back for more.
Well, like any good detective story, we need to look at who had a motive, who was really pushing these ideas.
Right, like who were the main champions of universal hylomorphism and plurality of forms? You mentioned Avicebron before. Wasn't he one of the big names?
Oh, absolutely. Ibn Gabirol, or Avicebron, as he was known in Latin. A Spanish-Jewish philosopher, his book Fons Vitae, which, by the way, translates to Fountain of Life.
Catchy title.
Yeah, well, this book, it really shook things up in the 13th century, like a philosophical earthquake.
So his work really laid the groundwork for this whole universal hylomorphism and plurality of forms combo.
Yeah, you could say that.
But wasn't he like going against the grain a bit? I mean, wasn't Aristotle the big name in philosophy at the time?
He was definitely a huge influence, but it was a more complex landscape back then.
Oh, okay.
Alongside the strong Aristotelian current, you also had a powerful Augustinian stream of thought.
Augustinian, as in St. Augustine.
A one and only.
Okay, so remind me, what was the main thrust of Augustine's philosophy?
Well, Augustine emphasized divine illumination, like God's light shining into our minds, helping us understand truth.
Okay.
And, this idea of God's active role in creation, constantly sustaining everything that exists.
So are we saying that these Augustinian thinkers, they were all about universal hylomorphism and plurality of forms, like it was part of their philosophical package deal?
Not necessarily. Not everyone who resonated with Augustine's ideas embraced those specific theories.
Okay.
It was more like different schools of thought emerging, each with their own spin on these concepts.
So different flavors of Augustinianism, each with its own recipe.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Take Saint Bonaventure, for instance.
The Franciscan theologian.
Right, he was a huge proponent of both universal hylomorphism and plurality of forms, and I think that's no coincidence.
Interesting. So both Avicebron and Bonaventure, they were coming from this Augustinian perspective, and they were drawn to these ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
Why? What was so appealing about these theories for them?
Well, I think for them, universal hylomorphism really fit with this idea of a hierarchical cosmos, everything flowing out from God, who is the source of all being.
Okay.
So everything in existence, even angels, participates in this divine outpouring, and matter, even spiritual matter, becomes that crucial link back to the Creator.
So it's like no matter how subtle or refined something is, it still has this fundamental connection to God through matter.
Exactly. Matter, even in its most spiritual form, is like the thread that runs through the entire tapestry of creation, connecting everything back to its source.
That's beautiful.
It kind of makes the universe feel like this giant interconnected family with God as the ultimate ancestor.
I love that analogy.
And the plurality of forms just adds to this idea, this vision of a super richly textured reality, teeming with diverse beings, each one with its own unique combo of forms.
It's like a cosmic kaleidoscope, infinite variety, springing from this one divine source.
Precisely.
But let's not forget about the other side of the coin, the folks who weren't exactly sold on these ideas.
Yeah, not everyone was jumping on the universal hylomorphism and plurality of forms bandwagon.
You mentioned Thomas Aquinas before, right? He was not a fan, if I recall.
Oh, Aquinas. He was definitely not buying what they were selling, even though, he was also heavily influenced by Aristotle.
Right, but he was a thinker in his own right, not just blindly following Aristotle.
Absolutely, a brilliant mind. Aquinas didn't see the need for this whole universal hylomorphism thing. He argued that the composition of essence and, the act of existing was enough to explain the makeup of all creatures.
So he was saying we can explain the diversity of creation without having to resort to this spiritual matter concept.
Yeah, he thought it was unnecessary.
But what about the plurality of forms? Did Aquinas reject that too?
He did, he definitely did. For Aquinas, a single substantial form was enough to define a being, to give it its unique identity. He thought multiple forms would just lead to all sorts of philosophical chaos, undermine the unity of the individual.
So he was team one substance, one form all the way.
Yeah, he believed in this deeper unity of body and soul, not a collection of separate forms just kind of coexisting.
So for Aquinas, the soul wasn't just one form among many. It was the essential form that shaped and defined our very humanity, holding everything together.
Exactly. It's like the conductor of an orchestra, bringing all the different instruments together into this harmonious whole.
I like that. Much more unified vision of the human person.
And this difference in perspective between Aquinas and, say, someone like Bonaventure, it really gets to the heart of the debate.
Right. Are we fundamentally unified beings? Or are we just a bunch of different parts, each with its own form, all cobbled together?
Yeah, it's a question that has implications not just for philosophy, but also for how we understand ourselves, our identity, our place in the universe.
Absolutely. It's not just an academic exercise. It touches on some really fundamental questions about what it means to be human.
Exactly.
But there's still this nagging question. Why did the Binarium Famosissimum, this pairing of universal hylomorphism and plurality of forms, become so famous, so intertwined in the minds of these thinkers?
It's a good question, and I think one possible answer lies in the philosophy of language. How does what we say about the world relate to how the world actually is?
Ooh, philosophy of language. Now we're talking. That was a hot topic in the 13th century, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. They were really wrestling with that, and it might just be the missing link connecting these two seemingly disparate ideas.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me. Like, I don't know, a 5-year-old who just happens to be really into medieval philosophy.
Okay, so imagine you're describing an apple, right? You say, it's red, it's round, it's juicy, all these different things.
Okay.
The question is, does each of those descriptions, does each one point to a separate form that actually exists in the apple?
I see. So, like, is there a redness form, a roundness form, and so on?
Exactly. That's what predication is all about.
Predication.
Yeah, it's how we connect our words, our language, to the real stuff of reality.
Okay, I think I'm following. So there's one camp that would say, yep, every true statement we make about something that points to a real form that's actually there in that thing.
Right.
And that would explain why they were so into universal hylomorphism and the plurality of form.
It's all about layering, right? The more you can truthfully say about something, the more forms it must have.
Like a metaphysical onion. But then there's the other side, the Aristotelian view.
Great. And they probably say, hold on, we can describe things in more or less detail without assuming it's packed with all these different forms.
So, like saying apple, then fruit, then plant. That's not stacking up more and more forms. It's just using broader categories to talk about the same thing.
Right, the substantial form, the appleness, that stays the same. It's only when we add accidental qualities like color or size that we're introducing new forms.
Oh, I see. So it's about distinguishing between what's essential to a thing and what's just like an extra feature.
Exactly. It's a more streamlined approach, definitely.
But it also makes you wonder, how much is language shaping our perception of reality rather than just reflecting it?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, this is seriously blowing my mind. So depending on how you interpret language, you could end up supporting or rejecting this whole binarium famosissimum thing.
It's like this hidden battleground playing out in how we talk about the world around us.
This has been a fascinating deep dive, so many layers to unpack.
It really shows you how complex and nuanced medieval philosophy was.
Definitely. So for our listeners out there, what are some key takeaways from our exploration of the binarium famosissimum?
Well, first, I think it reminds us that these ideas from centuries ago, they can still challenge us, make us think in new ways.
Right. Universal hylomorphism and plurality of forms, whether we agree with them or not, they force us to grapple with some pretty fundamental questions about reality itself.
Absolutely. What is a thing? What makes it what it is? These questions are still relevant today.
And the debate about predication, that highlights how something as seemingly basic as language can have huge implications for how we understand the world.
It really does. How we use words, how we describe things, it might actually be shaping our very perception of what ISIS.
So it's not just about some obscure medieval theories.
Not at all.
It's about how we make sense of the universe, how we understand ourselves and our place in it.
Exactly.
It's philosophy at its best, asking the big questions, exploring the deepest mysteries.
And the journey continues, right? We've explored these ideas, weighed the arguments, but ultimately it's up to each of us to decide what resonates with us, what makes sense in light of our own experience.
So for our listeners out there who, like us, love to delve into these deep philosophical waters, keep exploring.
Yeah, keep questioning, keep
You
seeking.
might be surprised at what you discover, maybe even a whole new way of seeing the world.
Until next time, keep those philosophical minds firing.
And happy pondering, everyone.